Hello, the internet. My name is Dean, and welcome back to another Ruby on Rails 20 and 20 challenge video. This should be week 13. Although, if you've been keeping up with how they've been uploaded, it definitely hasn't been uploaded for the 13th week in a row because I am still fully employed and sometimes overemployed with the OT that I work. So there's been a couple weeks where I've worked anywhere from 45 to 60 hours. And that does unfortunately chew into the YouTube time because I do need to, pay for the equipment that I use to record these videos, unfortunately. But we're going to take a look at creating some code snippets today. And what I mean by that is we're going to take a look at a couple techniques that are used in the software development world. And we're sort of using the code snippet idea just as a means of, having an exercise to perform. That said, maybe you do want to store your favorite code snippets that you use a lot in like a local database, and this is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. We're not going to be fully fleshing out the application, so there's going to be some stuff you'll have to tweak and implement yourself. We're implementing the ability to tag our code snippets, so each code snippet will have many tags, and a tag will have many code snippets, which means we'll have a join table between the two, which of course is necessary whenever you have a many-to-many relationship. This thing can't have many of this thing if this thing also has many of this thing. You need a table in the middle so that you have a many-to-one, and then you have a one-to-many here, which creates a many-to-one like middle table thing. So we're going to be using some taggables as the join table. This is a topic we've, of course, covered before on the channel. But today we're going to be taking it a little bit further. We're also going to be adding in language support. So we're going to be able to categorize our code snippets by language. So maybe I have a C# snippet that I'm like, this is, for X unit. I might have tagged it as a C# script or something, but I also want to specifically state this language that this code snippet is in is C#. And if I do that, I then want to take that language and I want to pass it into the syntax highlighter that we're going to use. So it'll be provided as the class that the syntax highlighter looks at in the CSS inside of our embedded Ruby. And it says, okay, this says, it's a Ruby script. So I need to color it in the Ruby highlighting or the Ruby syntax highlighting markup. Okay, but that's enough for me. How about we jump into some code? Okay, before we begin, I'd just like to say that in a sense, this tutorial is brought to you by Deanin.com because this is where I have already created the text-based tutorial that covers this entire video in text form. So if you are hard of hearing, it might be better to go check out this option. I'll have a link in the video description. But you can also come here if you would like to just quickly copy and paste the code snippets that we're creating and running in the future. Or, maybe you just want to leave the video now and go check it out. That's totally fine too. Everything that I talk about here will be covered in this blog post. As soon as this video goes live, this blog post will also go live. I just wanted to get that out of the way so that everyone is aware that that does exist. But okay, let's go ahead and let's get started. The first thing I'd like to do is I would like to drag over my blog post so I can read what I need to run. But I already know that the first thing we're going to do is go over to railsbytes.com. And this is a website created by Chris Oliver. It has a whole bunch of Rails templates that you can run to very quickly add stuff to your application or to set it up. In this case, we're going to be using this Bootstrap template. And before you run any of these templates, always make sure that you look at the source. And you can even see here there's a disclaimer. And the reason is this is going to be running some code on your machine, and you want to make sure that it's running what you expect it to run. Now, we have covered adding Bootstrap into an application before on this channel. So when I look at this, it all seems like stuff that I would normally do when I create a bootstrapped application. And of course, we've also covered creating a template before. So seeing these injection statements makes sense because we know that we have to inject these things into these files. But okay, let's copy this to the clipboard and then let's run this command. And this will very quickly add Bootstrap into our application. The next thing I would like to do, and we can already move over from this, is I'd like to discuss how we're going to be creating this application. Now, we have these code snippets, and if you're not familiar, this is a tool called Draw.io. But the basic premise is we have these code snippets, and each of these code snippets has many tags, right? And each of these tags has many code snippets. So we can say this is a one-to-many relationship, and this is also a one-to-many relationship. Now, of course, if you remember your database class, or if you're not familiar with it, it is not possible to have a many-to-many relationship. You can do a one-to-one. You can do a one-to-many, which is what this one is. And you can tell because it sort of forks off. This is called crow's foot, if you're familiar with your ERDs. But the basic idea is there is no many-to-many. And the way you normally get around this is you create this intermediate table called a join table. And you just say each of the models, in this case the tag and the snippets, each have many of that intermediate table. And then this belongs to a tag and this belongs to a snippet, which causes it to be a one-to-many from each of these. But ultimately, this whole thing is just a many-to-many, but with extra steps. So you don't need this diagram. It was just something that I thought I would share with the class because I feel like seeing it in this format is a little bit easier to digest. And I make no promises that this is the correct syntax. I don't entirely remember my ERD diagrams. But okay, let's go ahead and let's create some of these models. The first one we want to create, and we'll be using scaffolds for this because, again, this is sort of a rough concept, and we're going to be working from the back end in addition because I would like to sort of clear up what it's like to work in an industry when you are not the full stack developer. If you are on the back end team and you have to work with the integration team or the front end team to sort of provide them with some functionality, one of the, I guess, challenges you might encounter is you will not be able to test what this looks like when the user clicks a button. You might only be able to say at a conceptual level sometimes, this is how this will work. I've created this piece of functionality, but the ability to call this functionality just doesn't exist when I provide this to the other team. I might just have an entry point, or I might just have set up the database and then said to the other team, okay, the database is set up, it has a code snippet. It's up to you now to use this code snippet however you need to fulfill the requirements, that have come from on high in terms of how to implement this. So in that case, sometimes you will be on the front end and you'll just have to mock it up. You'll create a button and the button is, for now, just says, when the user clicks this thing will happen. But for now, it's just a button on the screen and it does nothing. This time we're going to take it from the opposite side and we'll work from the back end to the middle, which is the controller layer, to the front, and then we'll create the views so that you can finally see what things look like. But that tangent out of the way, let's go ahead and let's generate our snippets. So we'll call them snippets. We'll give each one a title and we'll give them a body of type text. Now, these scaffold generators do create a scaffolds.scss file, but we are going to be creating 2 more scaffolds, so we'll hold off on deleting these. And as usual, I've completely forgotten to disable the generation of these, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and say let's Rails G scaffold again. This time we'll create the languages, and we'll give each one a name of type string, and we'll say this is an index. We'll then also generate another scaffold for the tags, and we'll say this is a name, string, index. And we're just indexing these because with the tags specifically, there might be an instance where you have 20 tags attached to a code snippet. It's better to index that column. So the final thing we need to do, if we go back to our diagram, is we have the tags, we have the snippets, we need to deal with this taggable table. For this, what we'll do is we'll say Rails G model, and because we will not be creating this taggable model, from, or we won't be doing that manually. Rails will be creating it. So when you create a tag or when you create a snippet, Rails will automatically create this taggable model for you each time. So you don't need to do this. But we'll say Rails G model, we'll call it taggable. And then we'll say a taggable references a tag. So we'll say tag : references, and it references a snippet. So for this, we'll say snippet : references. We can go ahead and run that. And then the last thing we want to do is we'll say Rails G migration, add languages to snippets, and then we'll say a language : references. And we're doing this because the tags they already have the one-to-many setup, and the snippets already have the one-to-many setup through the taggable, but the languages don't. So if you remember from week 1, where we created the comments, we did have that one-to-many relationship where each post or each blog post had many comments. So we had to create that migration, and that's all we're really doing here. So now what we can do is we can say Rails DB : migrate. And we'll, cross our fingers and hope that this worked. Looks like it did. If we come into our database and our migrations, we can actually see that and if I full screen this, it'll be easier to see. We've created the title and the body for the snippets. The languages also exist. The tags also exist, but both of these have this additional add index at the bottom that is just saying make their name column an index as well. Then we have the create taggables, which is just saying, each one of these has a tag and a snippet. And then we also have the language migration that's just adding language to the snippets. But okay, that's good enough for that part. Now what I'd like to do is come over to our config and our routes.rb. And let me drag this over a little bit. I would like to say root of the application. So root2 will be the snippets controller index action. And then we can go ahead and save that. And now if we come over here, we can say Rails S. And then if we navigate to localhost port 3000, we should hopefully get moved to the index page. Okay, so we are on the index page. We probably have Bootstrap, but that's something we can take a look at in a little bit. And we can create our snippets here. So that's all good, but I promised we wouldn't be using the front end for this. So I'm not going to be creating a snippet yet. I'm just going to leave this idea in the ether for now. And we'll just have to trust that whatever's happening here is actually happening. And we'll just go back to our database model. Now, if at any point we did want to test this, we could always say Rails C. And we could say, tag.new, and then we can see that tags can be created. And this is usually how something like this would work. You would just, in the background, in some console somewhere, type some things, and you would draw conclusions from that. So you'd say, does like a tag have snippets? No. If I create a tag, so if I say @tag equals tag.new, and if I say @tag.snippet, doesn't work. Well, one of the things we need to consider when we're doing this is, although we're adding the references in our migrations, we haven't actually added the references to any of our models yet. The only one that has it is our taggable model. So our taggable.new, you can see it has a tag ID and a snippet ID. If I say @taggable equals taggable.new, and then I say @taggable.snippet, you can see that returns nil because it's expecting a snippet already because it has these belongs to's. But if I say @tag.taggable or .taggables, both of those are undefined. Why is that? Well, again, our tags don't have anything. Neither do our snippets or our language. So let's go ahead and let's add these. We'll start by going into our tag and we'll say each tag has many taggables. And then we also want to say taggables are a dependent destroy. This means that if I delete the dependent, I want to destroy the other model. So let's consider the case where I have a tag, I delete the tag. I then want the association between that tag and that snippet to be broken, which means the taggable needs to be destroyed in that instance. Now, I don't want, if I delete a taggable, for the tag to be destroyed or for the snippet to be destroyed. In that case, I would just expect the association between the two to be destroyed, which would be the same as just destroying the taggable. But this does mean that we'll also need the snippet to destroy its dependent, right? So this is a good way to stop yourself from having orphaned data inside of your database, is by calling the dependent destroys. This is also good if you attempt to delete things. You won't run into foreign key constraints. And foreign key constraints typically mean you're attempting to delete something that something else depends on. It depends on it through its foreign key, and it considers that a constraint, and that's where you run into the violations. So if you ever see an error that says, error deleting blah, 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 foreign key constraint, that's probably why. And that's a language agnostic thing. If you're using, C# and you're using SQLite, you'll also run into foreign key constraints in that scenario. So that is something to keep in mind when you're working on the backend. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and let's also say this has many snippets, because a tag does have many snippets. But that's not entirely what our model says here. So how does it have many snippets? Well, you can see right here that the tag has many snippets through this taggable. So why don't we just type through taggables? And that's really all we need to do inside of our tag model. We now need to take this and replicate it inside of our snippet. So our snippet is a bit more involved, but let's go ahead and let's just add in some basic stuff. We'll say a snippet has many taggables. And again, we need this to be dependent destroy. We also have many tags. And again, you guessed it, this is through the taggables, because this is a bidirectional one-to-many just through a join table. Okay, but now we also want to say that a snippet belongs to a language, because a language has many snippets, but a snippet only has one language, because in this scenario, the code will be related to one language at most. In the real world, you probably will have interwoven code. I mean, just take a look at our html.erb files. Those would obviously fall under two categories. But for now, we're just considering languages as a one-to-many relationship, and we're leaving it there. But okay, let's go down to let's go up to our language, and then we'll say a language also has many snippets. And if I delete a language, I want the snippets to be destroyed. So I'll say dependent destroy. And we're just doing this because we expect if we delete C# from our code snippets, just the language as a whole, that means we also don't want any of these snippets anymore. Now, of course, you're free to leave this off. This is just sort of how I created this contrived example for this project. So now, when we're creating our snippets and we're adding in all of these tags, we do need some helper methods that will allow us to, get all of the tags or display all of the tags. And we'll be doing both of those inside of our snippet model. So if we come into our snippet model, and then we come down here, we'll create two methods. Both will be called all tags. So we'll say all tags, and then we'll also def another all tags. And of course, you can't have two methods that have the same exact name, because then which one will it call when you say dot all tags? So instead, we'll say if all tags is provided a list of names, we'll do this. And if all tags is not provided a list of names, we'll do this. So if we are not provided a list of all names, then we just want to grab the tags. We want to map the tags. We'll map them by their name. And then we'll say dot join. Open up some quotes, and we'll join them with a comma and a space. So in this case, let's say our tags are, first, second, third. Let's say that's our list of tags. Then all tags will split this. It'll map it by name, and then we'll just say, you know, our list of tags. So snippet number 1 has the following tags. Oops. And then it has, you know, first, second, third. Of course, the quotes themselves aren't added. It's just whatever's inside the quotes gets added between the tags. This also means if we add in a fourth tag and we say this fourth tag is hello world, then our fourth tag will have a comma and a space before it, and then hello world will appear. So we can have multiple word long tags, and that's not an issue. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we'll come up here to the all tags. So if we're provided a list of names, we're getting it in this format, right? So we can copy this up here, and then we'll say, if we're given this list, we need to convert it into just some tags. So we'll say self.tags, which is just getting a reference to this snippet. And then we'll say for each of these tags, name.split, we're going to split on the comma. And then we're going to say .map. And map is a function that allows you to map each item in the collection or the array. This is, you know, another language agnostic thing. It's just some functionality that exists in certain languages. But it allows you to map each of these to a specific function. And in this case, we'll say, well, tag. So we're going to get a reference to, or we're going to call a function on our tag called where. So in the tag collection where the name is equal to name.strip, we want to say either, you know, first or create. So what does this mean? If the tag doesn't exist that has this specific name after it's been stripped of the comma and the spaces, then I want you to either find it or create it. And then I want you to set this snippet's list of tags to be whatever you found or created for each of these names. So let's say you already had 3 of these tags. You had first, second, and hello world, but this time third is a brand new tag that's never been created before. It'll say, okay, this snippet's tags are first because I found it, second because I found it, third because I didn't find it, but then I created it, and hello world as the fourth because I also found that one. And then we can go ahead and we can save this and we can move on to the middleware, which is going to be our controllers. Okay, so at this point, what we can do is we can clear our console, and then let's go ahead and let's actually just jump right back into it. Let's say we have a language. So say language.new, and we'll say at language equals language.new. Okay, at language dot name. So it has no name. So let's say at language dot name is equal to C#. And now let's say at language dot save. So here you can see that we created a new language. It was given all of the default data just like we expected to, and we gave it the name C#. Let's create another new language. So we'll say at language equals language dot new. At language.name is equal to Ruby, at language.save. And now let's say we'll call language.all, and we'll see that we have 2 languages created in here. Okay, cool. Now my question is, if we come back over to our preview of the blog post that's going up for this, and we take a look at what the final mockup will look like, and in this case we can sort of assume that we were at some level provided with a mockup of how we want this application to look at the end. It's not pretty, but if we create this nav bar that has a language dropdown, that probably means that we need some way to have these languages available throughout the whole application. Okay? And in this case, this is sort of the struggle you'll run into when you work in the API layer or the middleware layer or the controller layer of a stack like this. you'll be given a mock-up of what the user interface is hoping to do. In this case, it's hoping to have a list or a drop-down list. And the backend will say, well, you can create languages, and then it's your job to say, how does all of this fit together, given the fact that the backend tells me there is a way to create languages. I don't know how. And the front end tells me there will be a button that will show some of the languages. So in this case, the easiest way to make this display across the whole application, because the nav bar is presumably across the whole application, would be for us to say in the application controller, let's create a before action. So say before action, and we'll call it, before action, we'll call it set languages. And then we'll create this method. We'll just say def set languages end. And then in here, we'll just say at languages equals language.all. And let's go ahead and let's just test this over here. Of course, if we run this and then we say at languages, that will work and that'll be available throughout the whole application. So reasonably, we can now consider this navbar functionality implemented. It's of course up to the front end to actually create this navbar though. So let's hope they do their jobs. Otherwise, we might be in some trouble. But okay, what's the next step? Well, the next logical step here would be for us to say the snippets need to do things, right? So if we come into the snippets controller, this is sort of our safe space. Let me also save this. But this is sort of our safe space as the middleware people. We have some functionality in our pseudo API here that needs to be created. So let's try and do that. So we know that you'll have the ability to browse your snippets on the index page, right? And it looks like on the index page, you have your list of tags, you have the snippet, you have the name. And it looks like up here in the URL, they're also filtering by the language. And as an additional piece of functionality, it would also be nice to click on one of these tags, which it looks like they are links, and to filter by tags as well. So let's assume that we need to be able to click on both a tag and a language, or to search by a language in order to filter by those things. In that case, our index page now becomes a page that's filtered by parameters. And this means we can no longer just say at snippets equals snippet.all in our index. Instead, what we want to do is we'll just create a helper method. We'll say set snippets, plural, set snippets. And then we'll go down to the bottom of this page and we'll create a private helper method called def set snippets end. And then we'll tab this over so it matches our other indentation. So what does our set snippets need to do? Well, we already know we need to get the tag name. So say tag name is equal to params tag. And then we'll say the lang name is equal to params lang. So that gets us our two names out of the parameters. But if we're calling this, then that means that we also need our snippet params down here. And I'm going to full screen this. Our snippet params down here also needs to accept some parameters. Now, the backend has told us that the way that it's going to be calling to get all of the tags and to set or create the tags is through this all tags method in our snippet model. So we don't really have access to most of that, but what we do have is a name, and they said it's called all tags. So let's just assume that the parameter that's being passed to us is this all tags parameter. Then we'll also want to say, okay, we have all tags, but we also need a language provided to us, some way to grab a specific language. So maybe the front end can pass us a language ID, and then we'll just tell them, look, this is the name of the parameter. You need to pass us a language ID. Okay? So that's what we'll assume will happen there. Now, if we come back up to our set snippets, we now have both of these. We can reasonably assume that they'll be passed to us as expected, but who knows? Things go wrong during implementation. That's a problem for future us. The next thing we want to do is be able to filter by these though. So for this, let's create another helper method. We'll say filter by name, and then we'll pass in the tag name, and we'll pass in the lang name. We're just doing this because I like to keep code somewhat small inside of functions. And by abstracting this out, I already know there's going to be an if statement for this and an if statement for this. I don't also want to have that in here because we still need to actually set the snippets in here, right? So let's come down here. Let's create another helper function. And you could abstract this all into a helper class because this is getting a bit unwieldy at this point. I know it doesn't seem like much, but each of these functions could potentially sprawl out into its own set piece of functionality where you have more requirements being added to you. So it is a good idea to think ahead in some cases. Here, we're just going to create the functions inside of the controller, but there is a reason why you have, additional folders in here. And it's important to remember that you're still using Ruby. So you can still import from other folders and work like you would in a normal programming language. There's some layer of like smoke between Rails and what Ruby does, but at the end of the day, these are all .rb files, which means if you want to call out a different file from a different folder, you're more than welcome to do that, of course. But okay, how are we going to filter by these? Well, we already know we have the tag name. So what happens if I visit the index page and I don't want anything filtered? In that case, both the tag name and the language name will not exist. So our first check should be if the tag name is not nil, then do this. Do this if tag name is not nil. Oops. So we're filtering by tag name. And then we could say else if the lang name is not nil, filter by the lang name. Else, if both the tag name and the language name are nil, then we just want to say @snippets equals snippet.all. End. This @snippets will be available in the controller as soon as we return @snippets. But because we're creating it, what we should do is we should come in here and we'll also need an @snippets. And this will also need an @snippets because all three of these cases need to have one, or else we'll just be returning an undefined variable in some cases if at the end here we're just saying return @snippets, right? So let's start with the tag name. Okay, first we need to get a tag, a specific tag. And we'll say the tag is equal to tag dot, and Rails provides us with some queries that we can do by a specific column. So in this case, we'll say tag dot find by name, and then we'll pass in the tag name. For the actual snippets, we'll say @snippets equals is the tag nil that we found. So maybe we got here, there is a tag name, but the tag name doesn't correspond to an actual tag. So maybe someone came into this parameter here up in the URL and they just typed in some garbage. Well, in that case, we can't really say, grab that tag because that tag won't exist. So we'll say if the tag doesn't exist when you do this, then we just want to return snippet.all, or you could return something that says, display an error page or something else. And if it does exist, then just grab all of the snippets that belong to that tag. Because again, we have a bidirectional many-to-many relationship here with that join table. So we can say tag.snippets and we can get the tags snippets that belong to that specific tag. Now for the language, it's a bit simpler. We do still need to say, lang is equal to language.find by name. And then we can say this, just get the lang name. But right here, we're still going to be doing the search query. So we're still going to say, lang.nil ? But it's exactly the same as the last one because of how we've structured our code. Thankfully, this one's easier to sort of understand, I guess, because we know that a snippet belongs to a language. and the language just has many snippets. So of course you can just call lang.snippets. So there's a bit less smoke and mirrors around this this language one than the tag one, in my opinion. I feel like a lot of the tag stuff, especially, calling the all tags, some of that's a bit more advanced than we're used to. But the language stuff is really straightforward. It's just how you would expect to handle this in most other Rails applications. But okay, now we have a completed controller, a completed middleware. Where do we go from here? Well, it's finally time for us to consider the fact that maybe, just maybe, the application itself should provide this functionality to the end user. So at this point, let's put on our front-end developer hats and we'll say, okay, we have a mock-up. We need to create this user interface by calling things and providing things to the API that was created for us by the controller team. So in this case, what we need to do is come over to the Bootstrap documentation website. And I have a link over on the other screen here. Let me just grab this. So if you go to getbootstrap.com/docs/4.0, you can find this by Googling it. You will find a nav bar that you can copy and paste. So this right here, this whole nav bar will be, there's actually just a copy button right there. So we'll grab this nav bar, and this will be the first thing we do. It's a bit out of order from how the blog post is structured, but it's some semblance of feedback that our Bootstrap was created successfully. Let me exit out of the Rails console, clear this, and I'll say Rails S to start the server. And then I'll just refresh the home page, and hopefully nothing blows up here. It looks like it's all fine. Let's go into our layouts and our application.html.erb. And let's call a render function for our nav bar. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing I want to address is that normally, and I was also guilty of this, if I had a header, I would create it up here, and I would close it. And if I had a footer, I would create it down here, and I would close it. This is technically incorrect as far as I'm aware. Because all of this stuff belongs inside of the body tag. And instead of putting this down outside of it, what we can do is we can wrap this yield tag inside of a main, just as a way to say this is the main part of the application, which is a different section from the footer or from the header. So in the header, what I would like to do is I would like to say render a navbar partial. Of course, this is something we've covered on the channel before. So let's go ahead and let's create this navbar. So here we say it's in layouts/navbar. So in layouts, let's right click, new file, _navbar.html.erb. And then we'll paste in this code from the Bootstrap 4 documentation website. Once we do that, we can save this, come over to our website, refresh, and you can see we have a nav bar that's collapsed due to the size, but if I expand it a bit, we have a working nav bar. We also have this ugly on hover, and that's because the backend team was lazy and just ran a couple scaffold generators. So if we come into app, assets, style sheets, we can find the scaffolds.scss, and we can delete this. After we delete it, we can refresh, and now you can see our links change color and our on hover is working again. So that's good. What do we need to actually change inside of this nav bar though? Well, the first thing I'd like to change is I'd like to change this to snippets. I'd like the href here to just point to the root of the application. So I'll say this is just a slash. We then also have this drop down. I'll leave this link here just in case you'd like to say, new language maybe. And then this could be like the, new languages path or something. This is one way you can do this, of course. There's, I probably did that. I named it the wrong thing. It should be new language path. But this will allow you to go to a new path like that. Of course, you need to make sure you get rid of this extra % symbol here. So now if you click it, it takes you to the new language. That's cool. This will take you to the home. So that is one thing you can consider here. I will remove this though, and I'll leave this as an exercise to the viewer if you want to change that. What I would like to do though is update this dropdown to instead be the list of languages. So we'll say, you know, this is just the name languages for the dropdown. And instead of having these actions, what we'll do is we'll say, let's give each one of these a language of its own. So say at languages, which we expose to the entire application in our controller's application controller right here. So at languages dot each do lang. You can say %end. Each language, what do we want to do? Well, we want to link to the lang.name. And then we want to go to, I believe the middleware said we want to filter by the language. So we want to go to the snippets path, which is the root path. And we want each language to have lang.name in the parameter. And then we also need to give this a class of dropdown-item to be able to bootstrapify it. So if we refresh now and we click on this, you can see there's C#, Ruby, and something else here. Where's something else here coming from? It's this last dropdown item. So if we remove this, you'll be done with this last dropdown item. But what else you can do is you can instead say this is the new snippet or the new language path. Get rid of this %. And we can just say create new language. Save that, refresh, and you now have a new language button here. You can, of course, also change this to just be a Rails link that says link to create new language, comma, new language path, comma, class, dropdown-item. That would also work. But okay, this search form, we're not integrating. We'll just leave it on there. We'll consider that a mocked up piece of functionality for now. And we will instead go back to our application.html.erb file because now we need to grab Highlight.JS. So Highlight.JS, if I have a link to it, I don't believe I do. Let me go search for it. If we just search for Highlight.JS, we should find highlightjs.org. And you can see here that it is a syntax highlighting library that works in JavaScript. They have some basic documentation here. You can also select your packages. You can install with NPM or Node if you want to build it from source. In this case, what we'll do is we'll just say grab the CDNs and we'll go from there. So what we'll do is we'll grab this one. I'll move this over. In the top here below the style sheet pack tag, we will just add in this link. And then we also want to come to the bottom here in the footer, and we want to add the CDN as a script source. Below the script source, though, we want to say script, close the script tag. And then in here, we need to say Highlight.JS, so HLJS dot init highlighting on load. And we can save that. And that now adds in our highlighting into our application. So now what we need to do is we need to come over to our snippets index page, which is located here under app views snippets index, and we'll full screen this. In the index page, we will grab some Bootstrap CSS and we will create the main table that we saw on the main page. So we can keep this PID notice, that's fine. We can keep this H1. The rest of this stuff though, in this table, we will just get rid of. So the first thing we have is we have a table with a class of table. And I'm using Emmet tab completion for this. I do have a tutorial that covers this. I'll leave a link in the card, or you can just search WSL, I think Visual Studio Ruby on Rails. I think that's what I titled the video or something like that. But we have this table. We need each table, we need a t-head. And oops, this actually has a class equal to t-head dark. We'll close this T head. Then we need to say, okay, we have a TR, close the TR. Then we have a TH with a scope of equal to call, I think. And close this TH. And we actually have quite a few of these. So we'll grab this, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This will give a call span equal to 3. So we have the number. A snippet has a name. So these are just the areas in the table for each one of these. Actually, this is an extra one. So each one has a name. It has a snippet, which is the body of the snippet. And it has the list of tags. And then right here, we'll just say this is your manage options. So this will be the column that has the create or show, edit, destroy buttons. Okay, so now outside of our T head, we now have a T body. This does not have a class, so we can just close this. Now the T body will have a loop for the snippets we have on the page. And again, these are filtered by the controller, so we're just going to assume we're getting a list of snippets, and we won't question it any more than that. We'll just assume that the other two teams have done their jobs correctly and that we're safe to do this. It's all been null checked, etc. Of course, in the real world, you would also want to do some null checking just to make sure that if something breaks, you're failing gracefully because you don't want to rely on the other team to do all of that checking for you because... well, historically, at least from my personal anecdotal experience, it never really works out too well. But what we want to do is we want to give this a TH. We need this to have a scope equal to row instead of column. And then we'll say this is the snippet ID, I believe. .id. And we can close this. So that is a /th. If we save this, we can come back to our code snippets, refresh. We have a manage, a tags, a snippet, a name, and the ID. I don't know why I have this listed as this th. I might actually just be looking at this incorrectly. So let's go ahead and I guess we don't have a snippet created, so we should probably create a snippet. Well, I guess we have to deal with the form too. One step at a time, Dean. One step at a time. Okay, let's come back into here. We have the snippet ID. For this th, we then have the td, which is the link to the snippet.title. And then we have the snippet itself, which is just the ID of the snippet, which is how it knows where to go. So it's the snippet path with the ID appended to it. We then have a td for the snippet.body, which is the snippet up here. So we have the name, which is the title, the snippet, which is the body. We can then close this TD. We can then say we have a TD for the tags. Now this is going to be a bit more involved because we have to iterate through these. So we know we're getting a list of tags from the middleware team, which is coming from the backend team. So we'll say, okay, this snippet has a list of tags, and we'll say for each of these tags, do this. Say end right here. So for each of these tags, what do we want to do? Well, we want to link to the tag.name, and we need this to be the snippets path where we pass in a tag that is the tag.name as a parameter. That should be good. And again, you could also abstract this out into its own partial if you wanted to. Now below this TD, we then have a couple TDs here, which are TDs that are link twos. So link to, quote, quote, comma, and then we'll close this, and then we'll just copy this 2 more times. First one is going to be show the snippet, which is just going to be a link to the snippet. Next one is going to be edit the snippet, which is just going to be a link to the edit snippet path for this specific snippet. And then the last one's going to be a delete button, which is going to be a link to the snippet, but it's going to need a method : delete. And let's also give it a confirm prompt, and we'll say data confirm, are you sure? Question mark. Space it out. We can save that. And that looks good to me. Let's go ahead and let's refresh. We're running into an error. Error while rendering template, blah, 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 blah. It looks like I broke something. So let's go ahead. It has an unexpected end down here. Why does it have an unexpected end? Okay, and it looks like the reason why is because I was missing a do inside of this snippet.tags.each. That appears to have fixed that bug. Okay, so now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and let's create the form for this snippet so that we can start creating some snippets here. So what we want to do is come into our app views snippets form.html.erb file, and we want to add in the list of tags as well as the language selection. So for each of these, what I'd like to do is I'd like to say this is a class of form control. Let's go ahead and let's copy this. We'll do it for the body as well. And then we want to say we need another div here, which is going to be a class of field. This field will be for the list of tags. So actually, this field needs to be a large dash 10 large dash centered dash columns. And this is just some bootstrap CSS. And then in here, we want to say this is a form dot text field for all tags. Because again, remember, our model has this all tags exposed to it. And then for each of these, we want to say this, if this is empty, we want it to be like enter tags separated by commas dot dot dot. And then out here we'll put another comma and we'll say this is another class of form control. Oops, control. We can get rid of the space and we'll add another space right here just for consistency's sake. And then finally down here, we need one more div with the class of field, and this is going to be our collection select. For this, we'll say this has a form.label for the language. And then it also has a collection select. And this is for the snippet. This is the language ID, which is what we set in the controller when we were the middleware team. And we said, we need you to pass us a language ID. This is that language ID. We can then say this collection is the @languages collection, and this ID and name are fine. But I would also like to have, a class applied of form control. So if we do that, we then need to get rid of these extra 2 because my auto completion generated an extra set. We can then save this. We'll move this back over to here, and then let's try to create a new snippet. And here you can see what the GUI on the new snippet page looks like. So the title here, we'll say this is Hello XUnit. The body, I don't know, let's just go find an XUnit test example. We'll click on this getting started link. You can just put whatever you want in here. For this one, I just like to use this example of an XUnit test. We'll come over to our code snippet. We'll paste in this XUnit test. And we can, of course, expand this to see a bit more. You won't have syntax highlighting here, but we'll say this is a XUnit C# unit test. It's also unit test. Unit testing. It looks like it covers addition, adding, added. You know, you create all of your tags. The language is C#, and then we'll hit create snippet. And here we're running into another issue where there is a typo, it looks like, or some sort of problem in our model. It looks like, if I'm reading this right, this is name.split and not names.split. So let's go up to our models real quick. Snippet.rb, change this to an S, and then we'll just refresh to force this submit again. And it looks like I have a underscore added right here. It's kind of rude for Rubocop to do that to me, but I have no shame, so that's fine too. So now you can see here, this did not come out the way we wanted it to. Why is that? Well, the reason is we now need to update our show page. So we have the form. It's successfully creating this. If we scroll up, we can see all of these tags were added. The snippet was inserted, but what we're still missing is the actual show page. So if we come over to our app, views, snippets, show page, right in here, we can add in the necessary code to make this work, and it shouldn't be too difficult. Now, I'm not going to add in the code to show the language. That'll just be an exercise for the viewer again, because it's just basically the same as one of these. Maybe you want to make a link to the index page, though. So just follow what we do with the tag and try, I guess, the quote-unquote easier version as an exercise to make sure you understand how these parameters work in the index page. But let's, below the, or I guess we'll just replace this body part right here. So we have this strong body colon. Let's instead change this to be the word code. And then we want our code to be formatted. And if we look at the Highlight.JS documentation, it says in the same way that like your WordPress website might expect, it expects code to be pre-formatted. So it wants it in a pre and a code block. And then inside of that, it wants your snippet body. So let's save that, refresh, and you can see here it's already formatting it. But what I would like to do is instead of it assuming what the class is, because that's what Highlight.JS does, it assumes that it knows what the class is and it tries its best. If it doesn't know, let's say, you know, it guesses that the code you wrote is Ruby, your syntax highlighting might get a little bit messed up. So that's really not great. Instead, maybe, you know, maybe it just guesses some gobbledygook, like it says this is Lisp code or something, and you're just like, oh, I can't read any of this. In that case, what you can do, and you can see here how I'm changing this class, you can say this has a class equal to HLJS, and then, I don't know, whatever word you want. So say this has a class of Ruby by default. Refresh, and you can see the syntax highlighting is messed up because this is clearly C# code. Well, I guess it could also be like Java or something with some weird, you know, square brackets or something. But how do we change this? Well, of course, that's why we created this entire language feature. We can just say this snippet has a language and let's grab its name, which is why we use the name for this. Because if we then refresh, you can see that this is added in here. Because we named this C# with the pound instead of with like the word C and then the word sharp, the letter C and the word sharp, you can see that both exist here. In this case, it looks pretty good to me. Let's try to create another snippet and let's create a Ruby snippet. Let's come back to the home page. We'll say new snippet. And then why don't we just grab some of our own Ruby code? Let's grab this snippet.rb here. We'll paste this in. We'll say this is a hello Ruby file, or we can even just say this is our snippet.rb example for all tags. We'll change this to Ruby and we'll just say this is a Ruby code snippet for all tags, filtering, join, set tags, join table, something like that. We'll hit create snippet. It'll create it. We can then come over here and we can see this says HLJS Ruby. Looks good. If we refresh, it still says HLJS Ruby. If we come to the home page and we click on it, our syntax highlighting is gone. Why is our syntax highlighting gone? Well, for anyone who's been around Ruby for any number of time, they've probably run into this. We're using a library here called HLJS or Highlight.JS or Highlight JavaScript, which means JavaScript's involved, which means Turbolinks has once again appeared. The enemy of all semblance of productivity. Turbolinks is used to speed up your application by allowing you to, like, when you click through, it'll cache some parts of the JavaScript and stop it from just running every single time. That's under normal circumstances totally cool, appreciate it, but sometimes it can be a massive pain. There's actually two ways to deal with Turbolinks, and I have an entire section on the blog post over here that talk about this. One is you can add in this data attributes or data Turbolinks equals false attribute to any link on your website, and that should work in theory. In practice, it sometimes works for me, sometimes it doesn't. The other alternative is inside of your JavaScript pack, you can just comment out Turbolinks to remove it from the whole application, which is what I'm going to be doing here. And that's mostly just because, well, I'm trying to, get this tutorial done at some point and not go through and edit all of the links. But of course, you're free to do whatever you would like here. So if we do that, and then we come back to the home page, you'll see it rebuilding up here. It only needs to do that once to deal with the pack changing and no longer having that. But now we have the snippets working as intended. And of course, if I click on one of these tags, it'll filter out. You can see now there is only this X unit here. And, if I click on any of these, you have a wonderful list of tags that filters through that. And, you have all tags here to filter by that. What if we want to filter by the language? Well, we could say lang equals Ruby. And you can see that both of these are appearing here. Okay, and it looks like both are appearing there because there was another typo in here. Instead of saying find the language by name, I had lang instead of lang _ name. If I save that, that will no longer be nil, which means this should now work as expected. If I click on one of these, now only the Ruby ones show up, and I could also do the C# one if I had a whatever the alt code is for C#. But let me just create a new snippet. I'll say test case, and I'll give this like Lisp. And then I'll say this is a Lisp code snippet, which means I do need to create a new language. Say this is Lisp, create Lisp, come over here, create a new snippet, test case Lisp, create the Lisp one, we'll create that snippet. We'll come back, we'll actually create a test2, case2, also Lisp, create this one. Now if we come to the home page, there's 4 of these. And if I click on Lisp, it takes us to the Lisp tag up here. But if I do /snippets lang equals Lisp, only those two appear. And if I switch this to Ruby, the Ruby language appears, and you can see how you can use this functionality to achieve whatever you would like with your website. So this is largely what I wanted to cover today. It's a whole bunch of different functionality tied together, and you can sort of see the workflow that goes into creating something like this. I hope this is helpful. I'm going to go ahead and move to the outro video now. Okay, so that's going to do it for this tutorial. I hope this was helpful. I know it's been a little while, but that's just the life of having a full-time job. I'm hoping to finish the rest of these videos out before the end of the year. So if this video did help you, there should hopefully, barring any extenuating circumstances, and there probably will be some, but I will try my best to make sure I stick to my word here. There will hopefully be another 7 of these videos posted before Christmas. So you can sort of consider this a Christmas present if your idea of a good Christmas is learning software stuff. But anyways, I hope this video helped. If it did, please remember to like it. If it didn't help you, then remember to dislike it, because we don't want to subject other people to more bad tutorials. It's sort of an idea that I share quite frequently on the channel. Don't just upvote something because I uploaded it. Make sure it's helpful. Otherwise, downvote it so other people don't watch it. And if you do want to see more of this, consider subscribing, all that other YouTube jazz. But for now, that's going to do it for me. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for watching.